Thank you all for being here. I want to thank OEMP for helping us put this all together. Very excited about this presentation, and I'm looking forward to getting started. I'll just briefly introduce our presenters. Russ Gaylor, manufacturing consultant with OEMP. Gary Connor, senior consultant with OEMP. Cleve Key, managing consultant with OEMP. So Christy, would you like to say a few words this morning and talk maybe a bit about Hamwig and the work that you're doing?
Sure. So my name is Christy Wilson. I work with the City of Hillsborough. I'm the Workforce Development Manager. And I work with a group we call Hamwig, the Hillsborough Advanced Manufacturing Work Group. So essentially once a month we convene local manufacturers in Hillsborough to talk about, you know, kind of whatever topics are relevant at the time. We do a lot of work around pipeline and skills training, and work closely with educational partners to support those efforts. And most recently, you know, things like everyone knows have changed significantly. So there's just been a lot of talk on, you know, having the workforce re-enter the workforce in a safe way, effects of supply chain, what operations look for you know, local manufacturers now. And so Deanna and I connected with OEMP and thought that for this month we would kind of focus on these categories and bring in our OEMP partners to kind of help facilitate it. So yeah, that's it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I think we will go ahead and get started. Gary, I think you're up first.
Well, thank you. And thanks for the invitation. Jasmine, you're going to run the clicker, right?
Yep, I got him.
Okay, so I've been with OEMP for about 5 years. Prior to that, about 25 years on the road, flying all over the U.S. and Canada, and it's so nice to just work in Oregon now and with so many terrific people. So my background is in manufacturing. My dad taught me to weld when I was 3 years old, so I've been around a fair amount of my life, and I just absolutely love manufacturing and working with clients here in Oregon. We are in a state of change. To loosely quote Shakespeare, sometimes we choose change and sometimes change is thrust upon us, but we're asking people to change. And it's been said that 94% of the Fortune 1000 companies have experienced disruption in their supply chain, and certainly changes to their business models here lately. So how do you manage that change is a little bit what we're going to talk about today, and how do we stand back up, because we will stand back up at some point after this pandemic or crisis or disruption, whatever you want to call it. But there's an old saying I've heard, I don't know, 40 years ago, advice from a wing walker: don't let go with one hand until you get a firm grip with the other. We don't want to lose people off the wing, so to speak. And so that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about. There's a change curve that we're going to show you just in a few minutes. But think about some of the changes we've experienced just in our daily lives. Going to the supermarket, you see sneeze shields and one-way traffic patterns on the floor. They have cleaning crews. The last time I was at the store, there was a guy there cleaning the belt, sanitizing the belt after every customer went through. I watched, I believe on 60 Minutes a few weeks ago, plexiglass dividers between workers, and they were all wearing watches that would buzz if they got within 6 feet of their coworker. So maintaining that distance protocol. Other things that we've seen with our clients include staggering the shift start times, break times, lunch times, lots of visual cues, lots of reminders of washing your hands and maintaining distance, a lot of modified work schedules, even second shifts and so forth. Of course, we see in offices a lot of people like I am working from home. And I even saw this morning, I got up at 2 o'clock with a migraine, and I was watching the news, and they were saying there's an engineering company in Portland that's redesigning offices to create a better layout, including cubicles again, making a comeback. So supply chains, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but a lot of companies have pivoted to even support the COVID-19 response. So I'm not going to spend time with this slide. I'm going to show you some photographs, but just first step in standing back up for these companies is going to require them getting their house in order. And I think that requires a lot of the 5S techniques, which is a Japanese technique for workplace organization. So sort out what you don't need and set in order what you do need, and sanitize it or shine it in this case. Standardize, make sure everybody does it the same way, that there's a procedure in place, best practice. And if you do those first four well, it'll be easier to sustain, but it's never easy to sustain. So we'll talk about point of view storage and some of the benefits of that, and then kitting, and I'll give you an example of that. We're trying to limit motion, reduce handling, minimize tool sharing, develop best practices, and Russ is going to talk a little bit about that in terms of training. Huge opportunities in terms of removing paper. The Chinese started making paper in the year 200 CE, and it's been around a long time. But what it does is it creates a slow process, and then you're moving documents that might even contain virus. So a lot of companies are thinking more digital. They use of tablets, paperless systems. And I'm going to leave that training system for Russ to talk about. So starting back at the top of that list with the 5S system, here's the 5 S's: the sorting out what you don't need and setting in order what you do need. I would add sanitize to that third S, shine, and then standardizing it and sustaining it. So give you a couple of examples. We have a few photographs here that might make the case. Here's a client of ours on the left that is making some specialized carts, gravity fed, so a person can load it from the back and the person can take the parts out from the front without ever contacting each other. A lot of tool carts. There's a risk in most manufacturing environments of people sharing, borrowing tools from each other. This client in Eugene actually made carts for each person so that they have their own set of tools. This was before the COVID-19 experience that we're all living through, but it applies that if I don't have to share tools, I'm not having to increase the risk of transmitting the virus. So another nice example. Vending machines are becoming more and more popular too. It limits the contact of somebody going into a shared tool room. They can go up there, scan their card, take out what they need, and there's virtually no contact with another person. So on the left, you see that vending machine. On the right, you see on the top what we call a Kanban system, point of use inventory. When it gets down to a minimum level, then it's an automatic signal for somebody to replace it, and you don't have to have a lot of contact with somebody else to tell you that. You can see it from across the shop almost, very visual. And on the bottom, there's a kit. We use a technique that the Japanese call Mitsushimashi, which is roughly translated water skipper or water spider. And so instead of this company here that is assembling tow trucks, instead of the operators having to go to the tool room multiple times a day, they bring out a cart. This cart here, you'll see it has a pink sticker on it that says 16. That's truck number 16, and that's day number 3 of the build. So everything they need for day 3 on truck number 16 is kitted for them, and it just saves not only a lot of wasted motion, but the chance for contact between people. Here's an example of a client that, for quality purposes, put up plastic dividers so that the parts did not get commingled. Very, very critical to keep these parts segregated. But now that's going to be used in many cases to keep the people separated as well. So you'll see a lot more of this like you do in the grocery stores. So in terms of lean thinking, lean manufacturing, we try to put together an action item list. So if you go in and you clean, you sort out what you don't need, you find a way to keep it sterilized, and it's like doing dishes at home. If it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job, so the dishes just sit in the sink. You have to have a cleaning plan. You have to have an assignment made. So if it's Wednesday night is Gary's turn to do dishes, it'll probably happen. If it's everybody's job, there's little chance that it's going to be follow through. So sterilization and cleaning is going to be a very important aspect of the standing back up and reopening. Physical distance layout. In the past, we've tried to do facility layouts to get people shoulder to shoulder and passing parts one piece flow. That's probably not going to be the reality in the future. We're probably going to have to think about return belts so that if I'm doing an assembly and I'm passing it on to a coworker, it may be going down a 6-foot conveyor, and then that empty container will come back on a return belt of some kind, because we don't want people having to have hour by hour, minute by minute contact. Now, I mentioned earlier that 94% of Fortune 1000 companies have experienced a disruption in their supply chain. And what we're recognizing is that there are vulnerabilities, and with, for example, China having been viewed as the world's factory for the last 10 years or so, there's been a race to the bottom, commoditizing everything, and the price has been the most important thing. Well, now we're going to have to figure out how to balance price, quality, and availability, and not have so much risk of disruption because we have all of our eggs in one basket. So in boxing, there's a term called robust, and it means not easily knocked off your feet. And if you're a boxer, you don't want to be easily knocked off your feet. But if you have a very fragile system and all your eggs are in one basket, as it has been when companies kind of have viewed China suppliers as their tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, it puts us in a very tenuous situation, and our risk is high. We may need to reevaluate our sourcing plan, and maybe even to the degree of using artificial intelligence to find other redundancies in the value stream and in the supply chain. So much greater focus we expect to see, bringing things back onshore. A lot of our clients that we've talked to say they want to become more self-sufficient, not reliant on outside vendors and suppliers, a lot more vertically integrated. Automations and robotics have their place. It's not the end-all be-all answer, but oftentimes when it's a very redundant operation and it's very labor intensive, if we can apply some robotics or automation to actually take people out of that process and put them in a more value-added position, that might be an option and an opportunity to maintain physical distancing. Of course, in the past, going offshore oftentimes meant taking those low skill, low paid jobs away from the US, but maybe by applying technological skills in place of that, we might be able to bring up not only the skills of our folks, but capabilities within our organizations, and that might create a greater focus on value add. But I'm personally expecting to see a decoupling of the old style supplier relationships, where it was just, and lean manufacturing textbooks that have been written have oftentimes suggested that you try to narrow down your supply base to maybe 1 or 2 main suppliers. Well, we found out now that can actually put you in a risk situation. So if that decoupling means that we have to have redundancy in our supply chain, that may minimize some of that risk. More transparency, rather than that digital, or rather than that paper information trail that you have to print, you have to distribute, you have to store. Digital is almost instantaneous. A lot of people have resisted that and kind of kept the cost and pricing close to their vest. But we're going to probably see more transparency, more real-time data, and more availability of that data. We have all become very accustomed to instant gratification. You think about Amazon, we get an order placed this morning, and we can sometimes even get that material purchased and delivered by this afternoon. So we're getting accustomed to that, and I think we're going to see that more even in the business environment. So I think that consumes my 10 minutes. I know that's kind of a drink from a fire hose, but I did see a couple of questions. Jasmine, do you want me to just take a look at these? Conveyors are the death of efficiency. How do you believe companies will make up for that loss? That's a great question, Daniel. Yeah, you know, gravity skate track conveyors, they have their place. I get you. They take up room, but we're going to have room anyway. So I guess you know, it's pick your poison. You're going to have to move material somehow if you can't work shoulder to shoulder. So we're going to have to get very creative. And I remember one client up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, that used the banker tubes to shoot paperwork back and forth between two operations that were about a quarter mile away. And so some of those technologies are out there that we might be able to speed up conveyor of equipment. Any other questions I might be able to answer before we turn this over to Russ and Cleve? All right, then I'm going to turn it over to Russ.
Thank you, Gary. I'll go from the lean approach to this, to talking about your workforce and how we're going to bring them back. My name's Russ Gaylor. I'm a consultant for OEMP. I'm responsible for their workforce solutions program. In other words, their workforce development program for employees. And let's start off with a little statistics about what's going on with folks. Many of you probably experienced this in some form, but a recent survey showed that several weeks into this pandemic, there's been a number of cancellations or closures or reductions of business operations. And those are not only affecting the business, but the employees in those businesses. So 81% of full-time employees say COVID has disrupted their life, either a great deal or a fair amount. 40% of those U.S. employees say that their employer has frozen hiring, so they're not doing any hiring at all. 33% say their hours have been reduced or their shifts have been reduced or eliminated because of COVID-19. And as many as 61% of full-time employees are working at home because of the COVID crisis. All these little boxes on your right that show each of us proves that little statement right there. Next slide. So what do, right? This, like Gary mentioned before, is going to end at some time. And what do we need to do to bring our workforce back up to speed? And that's going to depend a lot on your industry and how customers come back to that industry. Is it going to be one of those situations where customers are slow to come back because they're cautious about purchasing things? Or is it going to be floodgates? I'm pretty sure that once they start opening up hair salons and barbershops, they're going to be swamped with folks. I know I need a haircut really bad. And so having your people in place and ready to go for each of those situations is going to be really important. Now, there's a few things you got to be asking yourself right now before that ramp up or opening starts. If your business has been closed during the crisis, then you got to decide what key functions are going to be critical in restarting your company. Is it going to be a full turn on, or is it going to be a phased in approach? The other thing you need to ask yourself are which employees are going to return to work and which ones have you lost for good. There is some conversations going on now that say some people don't plan on returning back to work? If so, that could leave you a skill and technological gap that you're going to have to address. Will it be necessary to retrain or cross-train employees to ensure those business capabilities are up and running when you come back? Or are you going to have to bring in brand new people and start from scratch to make sure that all those functions are adequately covered? How you do things in the workplace are going to be important too. Like Gary mentioned about respacing workers out, wearing personal protective gear, teaching them behaviors that minimize the exposure. That's going to be part of your training process. It's going to be involved too. So what can you do to specific actions you take? If you don't have a plan, it's still not too late to get a plan and start working on one. But some of the things you can do specifically is to increase the frequency of your check-ins. So if there's a problem, you can work with your employees to solve them. Be diligent about supporting their safety and role model those behaviors you want your people to practice. Have a plan of organizational protocols for hygiene in place. Pay attention to productivity or behavior changes. People are going to come back and there's going to be a stress level that's probably higher than normal because people are unsure of what's going on. So it's going to be important for you as leaders to make sure that you support your people and recognize those higher stress levels. Support the well-being of their people. Remind them that they're a valuable resource and you're here to help protect them as everyone does their job to meet the customer demand, the customer needs. And then not only take care of your employees, but take care of yourself because you're just as important as everybody else. So the question you should be asking yourself now is, what actions have you been taking and what actions can you take right now before this production ramp up takes place? Next slide, please. Just remember, it's not too late to plan. If you don't have a plan in place, you can start planning now. Use this downtime as a way of retraining your employees to cross-train across different jobs and to future-proof them for incidents like this that happen in the future. Those are kind of the short-term goals. Longer-term goals increase their competencies in digital literacy and social and emotional skills that allow them to more effectively interact with folks. And with that, I'll take questions.
I have a question, Russ. When you were talking about the skills and technical gaps that might shift from what they were before, is there a way to expect what those gaps are? And is OMEP putting together some sort of cohort training or something to address that, to kind of plan?
Great question, Christy. So OMEP does help provide with continuity planning for companies, and we can help you determine what actions need to be taken. So in the case of workforce development, it's identify who's coming back and who isn't, or where you may have skill gaps. Create a organizational training plan that'll address those gaps, and then ensure you have the training materials and content and the training capability in place before people come back. So that could include having a robust onboarding system that allows people, new people, to get up to speed as quickly as possible, because we just don't have the luxury of waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, 6 months to bring somebody up to speed. With a good onboarding program, you can get people up 35 to 50% quicker. Have a plan in place or a task analysis of what jobs are going to require skilled people, what skilled people do I have ready to do those jobs, and matching the people you have with the skills you need will allow you to create a plan that you can start getting your people either cross-trained or upskilled in those particular areas. OMEP can help you do that. Feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it. Does that answer your question, Christy? Anybody else?
I have a question about, or just, it's actually more of a comment about thinking a lot of our high-tech companies, their employees come via transit, and thinking about our shift work and how transit has changed now, and it's you know, different frequencies, social distancing, things like that, and just, I guess, in terms of expectations and employers' expectations of, you know, sort of helping an employee understand, you know, a certain amount of flexibility if you're transit dependent, knowing that that's an entirely different world.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing that people should realize is that this downtime is actually a perfect opportunity to do that development and training of your workforce that most people say we never have time to do because we're so busy meeting customer demands, right? And so being a half full kind of glass guy, here's a perfect opportunity to use this extra time you have to really nail down and develop that workforce training. With that, I'll turn it over to Cleve.
Thanks, Russ. It's a nice lead in your last slide that says it's not too late to plan. So we really want to focus on kind of where we go from here. And, you know, so far with the pandemic, most of us and most manufacturing companies have been in reactive mode, and completely understandable. So if we're going to change from reactive, we would like to go to proactive, and also do what we can to put a positive on this. So, you know, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. So what is that opportunity that your company can take out of this? So when we're talking about strategy and financials, we can look at this basic business model. So everything starts with your value proposition. You've got basically internal and external facing issues. So on the infrastructure, the workforce and everything listed there below, that's really your operations side. That's your internal focus. I think at this point in time, with where we are in the chaos and the pandemic, people are getting kind of a clear picture of what has happened with their external markets. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but you know, we want to figure out what those changes are going to be. And from a channels perspective and from a financial model, and we're going to talk a little bit about financial models and how they might change coming out of the pandemic, buying behaviors have changed significantly during the pandemic, and there's a good chance some of those behaviors will remain going forward. And that can have an impact on your financials because your different channels usually have different margins for your business. Next slide. So on the workforce, the implications, we really have two groups in our workforce. We have those of us that can work from home, that are with our families and with our pets, and you're probably on Zoom meetings with dogs and kids and cats in the background. But there's the whole other segment that is the population, the production workers, those that have to be on site in order to accomplish their jobs. Next slide. So at OMEP, we like to talk about options and information, right? We don't know exactly what the future is going to bring. And what we really want to ask you to do is figure out what are the most important questions for my business moving forward in terms of strategy and financials. And if you can come up with the right questions, usually there's some really good possibility that with you and those people that you work with, that you can come up with some answers to those questions. Next slide. So the main thing on workforce, you know, I don't see a big change actually if we talk about the two level of employees, back a couple slides, on the office worker, the availability and cost, the cost may actually go down. A lot of people are working from home. They might keep working from home. That good chance that's less expensive than having an office. Business travel is way down. So a lot of the white collar type jobs, the cost might actually be a little less. Now, on the production employee slide, go ahead, next slide. There are all sorts of regulatory things going on right now, and they had actually started quite a bit before the pandemic, but the pandemic, I think, will only expedite them and also push more of them into the future. So we continue to want to give more and more paid time off to workers. And from my experience, all the company owners I work with, they really do want to provide the best for the employees, and they would love to give all this stuff. Not very many of them are excited about being forced to do that. You know, when they are successful, they are happy to share that with their workers, but that's changing. This is one thing we do expect. There's just going to be more of this. So in terms of availability of production workers, there's probably going to be less availability, and they're not going to be at work as much, and plus you're going to be paying for that. So you're going to have less availability and more cost. And for companies that are running on a financial business model with low gross margins, this can have a significant impact. Next slide. So are these new issues? Not really. They're just exacerbated by the crisis. Before, you know, we had such low unemployment, you know, labor costs were already going up. We've been talking for years about the retiring and the changing workforce and the onboarding of new employees. Next. So what are some of the changes that we see ahead? Next slide. So one of the big questions is, how do we decrease labor costs while increasing wages? Because we do want to do the best we can for all our employees. So from an OEMP perspective, we're always trying to work with companies to help create family living wage jobs. So we really try to support those companies to actually be able to make more money for the company overall and also have all the employees benefit. So traditionally, we have done that through a lean and continuous improvement methodology. And in the last few years, there's been kind of a technological industry 4.0 revolution that actually is a big opportunity in this, because if you can figure out how to leverage technology so that you increase productivity without increasing the number of people, then both the company can make more money and individuals can make more money. Now, the interesting thing, or one of the things I find interesting on the technology and industry 4.0 is, you know, our manufacturing companies we work are small and medium manufacturers, you know, and if you're a $1 billion company, you've already spent a whole bunch on automation and technology and all these different types of things because you have lots and lots of money. So it's just in the last year or two that we have seen really a significant decrease in the cost of technology. And, you know, when we talk about technology and automation, you know, we're talking about simple automation, something that costs $5,000 or $10,000, right? A large mega company might spend $1 million to automate a line. That's not happening with a small manufacturer. But a small manufacturer might be able to put in a self-feeding bowl feeder, vibratory feeder screw gun that could increase the productivity of somebody putting in screws by 50%. So when we talk about looking at lean and technology moving forward, we really are focusing on what are the biggest rewards for small investments that you can have more efficient labor force. Next slide. So where do we go from here? we don't want to rush to make decisions, but begin to make plans, right? Start moving from reactive to proactive. Look at your changes in customer needs and channels. Like Russ said, ensure your best employees are doing okay and remain loyal. Actually, we'd say all employees, but for sure your best ones. And engage the future of manufacturing now. Next slide. So what are some things that any business can do? So a really nice exercise is to do a simple SWOT analysis. So that's your strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. It's got both the internal factors and the external factors, and a fairly easy exercise probably that any company could do. If you have a strategic plan that's actually written, get it out, dust it off, look at it, review it. Do you need to make changes? What are the things you need to do some analysis on? Update your financial model. The changes in the workforce and the changes in the channels, what impact will that have on your financial model? So I think that's the last slide. So I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Jasmine, any questions?
I'm hoping you can give me a sense, because manufacturing obviously has been an essential business, so many of them have continued their production through this adapting and adopting different practices and changes. But do you know of any manufacturers that have had to sort of lessen their workforce? And what I'm seeing out there is a lot of folks that were maybe an hourly wage job. They might have gotten laid off or furloughed, and they went into the unemployment system. And with the enhancement of the unemployment system, we're now finding it difficult. They're, as it's time to bring people back, they're like, call me last, because this isn't bad. This isn't bad.
Call me in July when my unemployment runs out right now, because a lot of people are making almost double what they were making by working. I won't talk too much about a political system that rewards people more for not working than working, but yeah, I have seen companies that I have one company I work with that, they had about half office staff, some designers and some stuff, and then a bunch of production workers. All their office staff sent home except for the production manager. And then for a couple of weeks, they shut down production completely. So they do large jobs long term, so it wasn't like they were providing something on a daily basis that had to be produced. So they shut down. When they reopened with about half their workforce in the production area. I went and visited them the other day. They have a safety manager sitting at the door. You walk in, they scan your forehead for temperature, they make you sign in, you have to wear a mask. And so they're doing a bunch of stuff, but they're only running at half their normal production. And I heard them having a discussion, and they were talking about adding more people, and they were talking about having to go hire people. Well, where'd that other half of their production workforce go? Well, I live in Central Oregon, so they're probably out hiking or biking or enjoying what we call the Central Oregon lifestyle. And will they come back to work? Yeah, eventually, but probably not for a couple months. So, the other thing that is interesting in all this with our different manufacturers is, I think I've actually heard of more companies that are really busy and booming than have really had the negative. Now there is a fair amount that have really been devastated, but there's a lot that have really boomed also. And that creates problems also, right? So if you had to ramp up and do what you can to produce more, sometimes that affects your financial costs. And also, if the demand doesn't stay high, what are you going to do when things drop back to a normal sales level? You're going to have to make adjustments. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Exactly. Thank you very much. And I also think that, in my forecast in July, when, the extension comes about, I think that they're probably going to extend it beyond the July deadline for the unemployment enhancement, just based on the numbers of people that and numbers of companies that will still be in their phasing process of amping up completely. And so that'll be just an interesting dynamic as we move along, seeing people live a different lifestyle because they are making, you know, a better wage than they were when they were actually working, and how that's going to change the communication and conversation between employer and employee.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I would like to see would be some type of, you know, if there's going to be ongoing stimulus, is some type of go back to work and we'll split the difference or something, so that they would at least make as much money by going back to work as they make by not work. But nobody's really asking me. So
That's what I was, just to echo that, I was going to ask, like, have you seen any like creative ways that companies can incentivize people to go back? Because, you know, with promotional opportunities and, way to be at the top of, to move up in the organization, or.
yeah, so I think there will be opportunity, right? In change and chaos, there's opportunity. Russ mentioned that there is a part of the workforce that might not be coming back to work, so that will be opportunities for some people maybe to move up in advancement. I really haven't seen that much of that because it's only been the last couple of weeks. You know, in Central Oregon, there's not a lot of cases. So my manufacturers I work with just started having me back in, and they've been a little bit slow, so they haven't really talked about programs to incentivize people to come back to work. The one thing on the financial model that I guess I would like to add that, right, I think this whole pandemic actually shows, you know, the danger of small gross margins, right? I talk about gross margins per company, and that's the incremental income that you're getting from producing product and selling it. And if you have small gross margins, you really don't have hardly any opportunity for errors, for mistakes or things that don't go well. If you have larger margins, there's a lot more room to recover, to get back, to adjust. And, you know, small and medium manufacturers, from my experience, a lot of them, you know, put their pricing just to stay on that small gross margin. So I would ask all companies also to look at, is there an opportunity in this chaos and crisis that we can improve our margin, which can be done in two methods. It's by increasing the amount you charge, but also by how do we become more productive and produce more at a less cost.
Great, thanks. We have another question. Can you speak, and this is from Greg Meyer, can you speak to the segments that are doing well, excluding the obvious medical device manufacturers?
Yeah, I guess the other one that's kind of obvious that OEMP works quite a bit with is the food industry, right? Everybody's eating at home. I'm working with a small company in Bend that creates dehydrated meals, and you know, in March and April, they've had their best sales ever. You know, normally it's just for backpackers, but for now, everybody's buying their dehydrated meals and either eating them and putting them in their pantry, I guess. So, you know, I guess, you know, I said a lot of companies that are doing really well and not as many that are devastated. I do know a fair amount of companies are companies that have longer term projects and delivery that they're doing okay. They haven't really lost orders. There's a little bit of slowing because the orders really aren't coming in, but if the lead time on their projects is long, they're doing okay. That could change in the future. So yeah, it's about as much as I have on that.
One thing I would add about unemployment, back to that issue, is that I do believe that the requirement is that if you are that if your job is available and you're offered to come back to your job, that you do risk losing your unemployment benefits if you refuse. So there is that, and I also think that it's a great opportunity for employers as they're bringing folks in. I mean, it's a great opportunity for you to get the best of your workforce, right? And to take a look at each person's skills and evaluate that with managers and make some determinations how, you know, you're bringing in and bringing back the soonest your best employees.
Yeah, I guess I would add to that comment. That is the official rule, I think, but in my experience and in these times, you know, they're trying to support people. They're not trying to punish them. I think there may be quite a reluctance and maybe not enough people to even follow up on people who would not be coming to work.
I was on a call last Friday, and they were kind of talking about that, and that they said there were some kind of law firms getting ready to kind of incentivize lawsuits. So if you were, you know, forced to come back to work,
Yeah.
and you're exposed and don't feel safe, then, you know, that you know, you could sue your employer. Is that, have you?
I've heard a little bit about that, yes, and there is, yeah, I guess most employers would probably realize that trying to force somebody back in these times would be problematic.
On one of our programs that we did, one of our small business solutions series workshops, we had an employer attorney that walked through different scenarios of what an employer could do and what they, you know, shouldn't do, how they might think about things. So I would invite folks to go and listen to that. It was very, very informative, and to have someone, it's actually quite difficult to find an employer attorney. It's much easier to find an attorney to represent employees. So he did a great job, and like I said, outlined several different scenarios to think about for an employer perspective of, you know, if different things come up, and really what the sort of legal thinking is around at this point in time workplace safety, but also resistance, and what kind of questions you can ask, right? Like if somebody's like, I'm sick. You know, now you probably have the latitude to ask them if they have symptoms that look as though they might be COVID-19 related. And in the past, I mean, you could certainly not do that, but under these circumstances, there are some things you can do as an employer that keeps the rest of your workplace safe as well. But a very informative workshop.
Yeah, another thing that I find super interesting that I think is going to be a behavior change is that, you know, American culture used to pride itself in, oh, I go to work even if I'm sick, right? And if you didn't go to work and you only had a cough, it's like, well, man, I can't believe that person, they call him sick when they just have a little sniffle. And I think that is the change that I believe is going to stick around, that people aren't going to work at all costs from here on out, even if they're sick. And it's no longer going to be that badge of honor, right?
Well, and I think their coworkers are not going to tolerate it either, right? You know, it's going to be like, you know, go home, you're sick, and I mean it, right?
Yep.
All right. Any other questions, comments from anyone? All right. Well, Russ, Gary, Cleve, thank you so much. Very informative, very interesting, great topic. And, you know, certainly on everyone's top of mind now is, you know, opening back up again. And then how do I do that right? And thank you very much for this information. Also, Jasmine and Christy, thank you for putting this all together. Really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for attending and participating.
Thank you.